Welcome to the table and a very special expansion laid out here in front of us. This is Gaia Project, The Lost Fleet.
Yeah.
This is the very first expansion for Gaia Project, which came out in 2017.
I know, it's been a bit.
It has been a minute. If you are not familiar with Gaia Project, hopefully you're familiar with Terra Mystica, because Gaia Project is effectively the science fiction version of Terra Mystica. It actually does some things, in my opinion, better than the original Terra Mystica.
Prefer.
It is, unless you're diehard into the fantasy theme, Gaia Project, I think, is the better game or the better version to play. Now with Age of Innovation, that might be different now.
Yeah, they've kind of gone in two separate directions.
Yes.
And Gaia Project didn't get the Age of Innovation treatment, but it did get this new expansion.
And this new expansion
offers a lot.
It offers quite a bit. It offers a lot of the things you might expect. There's a lot of sort of into the more category. There's some very unique and different things also. And there's also a lot of components that we have here laid out in front of us that are replacement components for the original. But most of this is not into that category.
Yeah, of course, a big part of the Lost Fleet is the Lost Fleet, which we'll talk about. But there are some minor things that are happening here. First of all, yes, like David said, there's going to be new scoring tiles, some new tech tiles, new turn order tiles, things that incorporate all of the different stuff from the expansion.
Yeah.
So there's everything you can do in the expansions. There will be ways to score, including the 2 new planet types, which I think is an understated addition to this expansion that's maybe not obvious right away, but it does come with 2 new planet types, asteroids and proto-planets, which kind of serve like the actual planets do. You have to terraform them if you want to build on them, but these new factions interact directly with those tiles. And since these tiles don't appear on the board at all, they've introduced a variety of new configurations to kind of change the board layout and have these kind of spaced out around the board as well, which is interesting.
Yeah, you're going to find straight from the beginning when you set this up, you take those large tiles that you normally have, you set them out sort of askew a little bit differently than you normally would, leaving individual spaces. And some of these 3 tile spaces are going to go in and around those. So in all like sort of the corner spots. These tiles are going to include, like Ryan said, a lot of those asteroids for one of the factions, or 2 of them rather. And then the proto-planets, but also there are going to be a number of the Lost Fleet ships. So in a 4-player game or 3-player even, you're going to have all 4 of the Lost Fleet ships. Those are not only represented by those individual tiles, but represented by these giant Lost Fleet boards too, because you actually have to interact with the ships out there on the board in order to interact with the various Lost Fleet ships.
Yeah, it's a really interesting new mechanic, the introduction of these, because they can be very powerful. Everybody is going to have a little exploration board, and they've not just the new factions. Every faction has a balanced board. Some of these actually introduce new powers to the older factions. Some of them have new powers for the new factions or whatever, but you just have to build up to them within your range, kind of like when you would terraform a planet. You have to be close enough. However, exploring one of these, it's not the same as building a building or putting a mine down.
No, it's not part of your colony.
Right, it doesn't become part of your network. It doesn't increase your range, but you have to be able to reach it. And once you do, you can explore it to unlock a wide variety of effects and abilities, to be honest.
Yeah, on those little tiles that everyone's going to get now with their factions, you're also going to have a number of shuttles. Those shuttles are what you're going to use to go and place and explore some of those Lost Fleet ships. And when you have a shuttle on one of the Lost Fleet ship, it basically grants you access to whatever's going on that Lost Fleet ship. And each of the Lost Fleet ships do slightly different things and also slightly similar things. You can see here is a couple examples. You're going to have some tech tiles that are available, or you have access, but only if you have a shuttle on here. You also have some just straight up actions. There's some QIC actions, also some normal actions that you wouldn't otherwise have at your disposal unless you've explored that ship. And in fact, one of the new factions even starts with a shuttle on one of the ships out there. So it opens, there's even some Federation tiles on these things. One of them, like this one here, actually has artifacts, which are completely new to the game. The artifacts go on there, and they are sort of mostly one-time things. When you explore an artifact around here, you can take this. It's a new action that you can actually take once you have a shuttle here, and then take the artifact and do what it says. And there's obviously a big appendix. That costs
a lot. It costs 6.
6 power.
6 power, which
you
is
remove
a lot.
6 power from any one of your 3 levels.
Yeah, and these ships, they're going to be spread out across the board randomly. So you kind of have to base your strategy on which one of these you can reach. If you see one of these ships that has a tech tile that maybe you really want, or a Federation tile that you really want, but it's all the way across the board, that might not be realistic to get. One other thing on the Lost Fleet that I want to talk about.
The names?
The names. This is pretty cool.
So the names of the Lost Fleet ships. You've got the Twilight.
Yep.
You've got the TF Mars.
Yeah.
You've got the Eclipse, and you've got the Rebellion. An awesome nod on their part.
Just a little bit of a nod.
A handful of other very, very popular science fiction board games.
For sure. So that I would say that this is one of like the meatiest parts of.
It's the name of the expansion.
And it is the name of the expansion, the Lost Fleet. You're going to be interacting with these a lot. You're going to want to use those tech tiles, those Federation tiles, these actions. You even get some recharges for going to these different factions, ships. But of course, there are new factions you can play as well. There are 4 new playable factions, just like in the base game. Each faction is double-sided, so you can kind of choose which faction. And these all interact with those proto-planets and asteroids.
Yeah, the Tinkerroids, the pink factions are the ones that will start on the asteroids. The Tinkerroids, one of them. Their big thing is they come with this little stack of tiles. There are, I think, 6 tiles here, 3 of which are accessible in the first 3 rounds, the other 3 in the last 3 rounds. But each round, you're going to pick one that's for your applicable round, and it effectively gives you another thing that you can do that round.
Just that round.
Just that round. So you take it, and then at the end of that round, you're going to get rid of that, and then get another one for the next round. And they start up on one of the research tracks accordingly. But that's their big thing, is this stack.
And they don't start with a mine either. They start with the Planetary Institute at the start of the game.
They don't start with 2 mines. Cool. No mines out on the board, but the Planetary Institute. So again, I have to say, even without these new factions, I've always been impressed with how many different factions and how many different things they did, but this is kind of crazy.
Well, and that one's kind of actually connected to this one, the Moads. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. They start with 1 mine, but they also start with access to the TF Mars ship to start with. But both of these, the Moads and the Tinkerers, have an interesting setup that you're not going to find with any other faction in the game. Yeah. They're actually drafting cubes that represent the different kinds of planets. Some of those planets are going to always cost 3 for them to terraform, and some of those planets are always going to cost 1. So you're kind of setting at the beginning of the game a different setup for how you're terraforming every single game. The only caveat to that is if there are other players at the table, their planets have to be 3. So you can't just snake all their planets away from what. But it leads to a lot of interesting different play styles with these two. Now that's just the one side. The other sides don't have that, so it makes for those 2 factions to be a little interesting, I think.
Yeah, I will say, we haven't played with this yet, but even just looking through the rules, there are a lot of little detailed things that you have to consider, a lot of sort of if-then scenarios. If you're playing with this faction, if you're not playing with these factions. So you're going to want to follow through that very closely during setup if you're going to use these, because there's a few steps for sure.
But the power for these guys, they actually have these like planetary power tokens. They can like drop these power rings on their planets and power them up, giving you +2 power to whatever building is on there.
So you're going to get a lot closer to those Federation tiles with these tiles.
I would say that these 2 are more advanced than their flip side. The flip sides are a little bit more streamlined. Like the Space Giants are cool. By the way, the blues start on the proto-planets, which is awesome.
Yeah.
But the Space Giants, their power actually comes from their exploration. They have a special exploration tile with an action on it that lets you build a mine. Yeah. So that's pretty interesting, too.
Well, build a mine with two free
terraforming steps, which is pretty cool,
which is pretty massive. The other thing is, one of them it's always just 1, right?
Oh, yeah, always just 1 to terraform.
Oh, it's the Darkanians, actually. Yeah, this is the other pink side. Their big thing is they only have to terraform 1 step, period, end of statement.
Yeah, that's a lot of flexibility.
Which I'm sure, like, to me, I'm not a hardcore Gaia Project player. So these are appealing to me because that's one of the most constricting parts of the game to me.
Sure.
Is having to like do all that, because it's always so costly. For it to just be 1 step is like, okay, that's pretty. I've always know what it is. It's very little. Other than that, they start up on 2 of the different tracks, but that's their big power, which is not insignificant.
And one more thing too that I think is really cool. First of all, there's a lot of tiles that cover other tiles for balancing purposes, as reminders for what some of the new factions are. In fact, there's a new tile for the tech track that kind of balances one of those trees or one of those rows, whatever you want to call them. But then also, since there are 2 new planet types, the asteroids and the proto-planets, the icon for all planets has changed to include those. They actually reprinted components that feature that icon. So it's always, which is, they did that with Arc Nova too. When they, I like when a publisher goes the extra step. And not only that, they printed multiple sets of every tile so that when you're setting up the board, you only have to grab out of a bag. You could put all the 4-player stuff in one bag, and it's all the tiles you need for setup.
It was interesting.
Which is interesting.
It actually took us a second to figure it out because really you only need the 4 ships, and then the back of one it could say use this for 1 to 4 players.
But they printed multiples.
But they printed multiples, so you could just have a bag ready for setup for 1 player up to 4 players to make things a little more quick. Because this is a bit of a game to set up.
It definitely is.
It always has been. This is going to make it even more of a game to set up. But if you're a Gaia Project fan, you know the score. I mean, you're signed up for that.
For sure. And again, this is going to very much change up the game. Not just the new factions. I think this Lost Fleet, having these fleets out there for people to compete for and give you something to do besides mining and terraforming is very interesting.
Yeah, so that is Gaia Project, the Lost Fleet. We haven't covered everything. This is not a how to play. We haven't even shown you all the things. But if you have any questions, please make them in the comments below. We'll get down to answer whatever we can. Until next time, make sure everyone has fun at the table, and we'll see you then.